You've been called controlling, maybe to your face, maybe behind your back, maybe only in your own head, in the quiet moments when you wonder why you can't just relax like other people seem to. You need to know the plan. You need to handle things yourself, because handing them to someone else means trusting that they'll be done right. And you've learned not to count on that. You lie awake running through contingencies, anticipating what could go wrong, preparing for problems that haven't happened yet. You feel a low, constant hum of tension whenever things are outside your control, and a flood of relief, however brief, when you manage to get a grip on them again. And somewhere along the way, you've started to believe that this makes you difficult, a control freak, someone with a problem. But what if that's the wrong story entirely? What if your need for control is not a character flaw, not a personality defect, not evidence that something is wrong with you, but the intelligent, adaptive response of a person who learned early and for good reason that safety could not be taken for granted? What if the vigilance you carry, the need to manage and anticipate and control, was not a dysfunction you developed, but a survival strategy you built, one that made complete sense in the environment that shaped you and kept you safe when nothing else would? Karen Horney, one of the most humane and penetrating psychologists of the 20th century, understood the need for control not as a flaw to be ashamed of, but as a strategy for coping with a deep and early anxiety about safety. She saw that the people who need to control everything are very often people who learned in childhood that the world was not reliably safe, and who developed control as the best available defense against a threat that was, at the time, entirely real. This is not a video about fixing what's wrong with you. It's a video about understanding what was right about you, the intelligence of a strategy that protected you, and what it might mean to finally feel safe enough to loosen it. Karen Horney was a German-American psychoanalyst who broke from Freud to develop a more relational, more humane understanding of the human mind. Where much of the psychology of her time located our problems in biological drives, Horney located them somewhere more understandable and more hopeful, in our early relationships, and specifically in whether or not we grew up feeling safe. Her work is marked throughout by a deep compassion for the ways human beings adapt to difficult beginnings, and few thinkers have written more insightfully about how the strategies we develop to survive can shape an entire life. At the center of Horney's thinking is a concept she called basic anxiety, the deep, pervasive feeling of being isolated and helpless in a world that feels potentially hostile. This basic anxiety, she argued, develops in childhood when a child does not receive the consistent warmth, security, and reliability they need to feel fundamentally safe. When a child grows up in an environment that is unpredictable, unsafe, cold, chaotic, or threatening, whether through overt harm or through the quieter absence of dependable security, they are left exposed to this basic anxiety. And a child in that situation faces a profound problem. They must find some way to feel safe in a world that has not provided safety. Horney's great insight was that children are extraordinarily resourceful in solving this problem. Faced with basic anxiety, the child develops strategies, ways of coping with the felt lack of safety, ways of managing the anxiety and protecting themselves against a world that feels threatening. These strategies are not signs of pathology. They are intelligent adaptations, the best solutions a child could find to a real and pressing problem. And the specific strategy a child develops depends on their temperament and their circumstances. But all of them share the same underlying purpose: to create, through the child's own efforts, the safety that the environment failed to provide. The need for control is one of these strategies, and understanding it in Horney's terms transforms how we see it. The child who cannot rely on their environment to be safe learns to create safety themselves, through vigilance, through anticipation, through mastery, through controlling as much of their world as they possibly can. If you cannot trust the world to be predictable and safe, you make it predictable and safe through your own relentless effort. You learn to anticipate danger before it arrives. You learn to handle things yourself, because depending on others has proven unreliable. You learn to manage every variable you can, because every variable left unmanaged is a potential threat. This is not dysfunction. It is a child doing something remarkably intelligent, manufacturing, through control, the security that should have been provided but wasn't. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. To really understand why you need control to feel safe, it helps to look at what was happening not just in your mind, but in your developing nervous system. Because Horney's psychological insight is powerfully reinforced by what modern research has learned about how early environments shape the brain's response to threat. Horney understood that the strategies we develop in childhood are responses to a felt lack of safety. Modern neuroscience adds a crucial layer to this. It shows us that the brain and nervous system of a child developing in an unpredictable or unsafe environment actually adapt to that environment, becoming calibrated for threat. The human brain contains a sophisticated threat detection system centered on structures like the amygdala, whose job is to scan for danger and trigger the body's stress response when danger is detected. In a safe, predictable environment, this system develops a baseline of relative calm, activating when there is genuine threat and settling when there is not. But in an unpredictable or unsafe early environment, this system adapts differently. Research on early stress has shown that children who grow up in chaotic, threatening, or unreliable conditions often develop a threat detection system that is more sensitive, more easily activated, more prone to staying switched on. Their nervous system learns, quite reasonably, that the world requires constant vigilance, that danger can come at any time, that safety cannot be assumed, that relaxing your guard is not something this environment permits. This heightened vigilance is not a malfunction. It is the nervous system correctly adapting to the environment it found itself in, developing exactly the sensitivity that environment required. And here is where control comes in, with a logic that both Horney and modern research illuminate. The nervous system finds unpredictability deeply threatening. Uncertainty itself registers as danger. Control is the solution to unpredictability. When you control your environment, you make it predictable, and when you make it predictable, you reduce the threat signal, and when you reduce the threat signal, you feel, however briefly, safe. This is why control produces that flood of relief. You are not being difficult or rigid. You are doing the one thing that reliably quiets a nervous system that learned long ago that the world is not safe and vigilance is required. Control is how you turn down the alarm. What emerges from both Horney's account and the neuroscience is a picture that should replace shame with understanding. Your need for control is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is evidence that you adapted, intelligently, effectively, to an environment that required adaptation. Your mind developed a strategy for creating safety, and your nervous system developed the vigilance to support it. Together, they did exactly what they were supposed to do. They kept you safe, or at least as safe as you could be, in a situation where safety was not freely given. The control freak label gets the story exactly backwards. You are not someone with a defect. You are someone who survived, using the intelligence available to you, and whose survival strategy is still running because it was never told the danger had passed. If the need for control was an intelligent survival strategy, the natural question is why it persists into adulthood, often long after the original threat is gone and the person is objectively safe. Horney understood this with great clarity, and it is the key to understanding why the strategy that once protected you can become a source of suffering. The strategies we develop in childhood, Horney observed, tend to become rigid and automatic. What began as a flexible response to a specific situation hardens over time into a fixed feature of the personality, a default mode of operating that runs regardless of whether the current situation actually calls for it. The child who needed control to survive an unsafe environment becomes an adult who needs control in every environment, including the safe ones, because the strategy has become automatic, operating beneath conscious choice, applied indiscriminately to situations that no longer require it. This is the crux of the problem. The vigilance that was appropriate to a genuinely unsafe childhood becomes a vigilance applied to a life that may no longer contain the same threats. You control your adult relationships as though they carried the dangers of your early ones. You anticipate betrayal or chaos or abandonment that may not be coming, because your system learned to anticipate them when they were coming and never updated. You cannot relax, cannot delegate, cannot trust, cannot let go. Not because your current life actually requires this level of control, but because the strategy that once matched your environment no longer matches it and continues running anyway. The neuroscience illuminates this too. A threat detection system that was calibrated for danger in childhood does not automatically recalibrate when circumstances improve. The nervous system that learned hypervigilance continues to be hypervigilant, continues to scan for threats, continues to find the world dangerous even when the objective danger has passed. The alarm keeps going off, not because there is a fire, but because the system was set, long ago, to treat everything as a potential fire, and has not yet learned that it is finally safe. This is why simply telling yourself you're safe rarely works. The vigilance operates below the level of conscious reassurance, in a system that learned its lesson too well. Horney saw both the tragedy and the hope in this. The tragedy is that a strategy which once served survival can, in adulthood, become a prison, keeping you tense, exhausted, unable to rest or trust or connect, controlling a life that no longer requires it, and paying an enormous price for the control. But the hope is equally real, because if the need for control is a learned strategy rather than a fixed flaw, then it can be understood, and what was learned in response to one environment can slowly be updated in response to a new and safer one. The strategy is not who you are, it is what you learned to do, and what was learned can be, with patience and understanding, gently unlearned. Horney's understanding, reinforced by what modern research reveals about the nervous system, points toward a compassionate and realistic path, not toward forcing yourself to stop controlling, but toward building enough genuine safety that the control is no longer needed. The first movement is to replace shame with understanding, to stop treating your need for control as a defect and start recognizing it as an adaptation. This reframe is not a minor thing, it is the foundation of everything else. As long as you see your need for control as evidence that you're broken or difficult, you will be at war with yourself, adding self-criticism on top of the anxiety that drives the control in the first place. The shift comes when you understand what Horney and the neuroscience both reveal, that your need for control made sense, that it protected you, that it was intelligent rather than defective. Offering yourself this understanding does not instantly dissolve the need for control, but it removes the shame that compounds it, and it opens the door to working with the strategy compassionately rather than fighting yourself. The second movement is to recognize when the strategy is misfiring. To notice the difference between situations that genuinely require your vigilance and situations where the old strategy is running automatically without cause. Much of the suffering of the control strategy comes from applying it indiscriminately to a whole life rather than to the specific situations that warrant it. The practice is to begin noticing, is this situation actually dangerous, or am I responding to it as though it were, out of old habit? Is this relationship actually unreliable, or am I controlling it because I learned to control unreliable relationships long ago? This is not about forcing yourself to stop. It's about beginning to distinguish the present from the past, so that your vigilance can gradually become responsive to your actual circumstances, rather than to circumstances you left behind years ago. It helps to remember that the control strategy is not intelligent in the way conscious thought is intelligent. It does not evaluate each situation freshly and decide whether control is warranted. It simply fires, automatically, whenever anything resembles the original conditions of threat: a raised voice, an uncertainty, a moment of depending on someone else, a plan that could go wrong. The resemblance does not have to be accurate. It only has to be close enough to trip the alarm. This is why you can find yourself flooded with the need to control in situations that, on calm reflection, carry no real danger at all. The old system is pattern matching the present against the past, and acting on the match before your conscious mind has a chance to weigh in. Learning to catch this, to notice the moment the alarm fires and ask whether the present situation truly warrants it, is how you begin to insert conscious choice into a process that has been running on automatic for most of your life. The third movement is to give your nervous system new experiences of safety, to help it learn, slowly and through direct experience, that the danger has passed. Here the neuroscience offers genuine hope. The nervous system that learned hypervigilance is not permanently fixed in that setting. The brain retains, throughout life, the capacity to learn new patterns. But it does not learn through reassurance alone. It learns through experience. This means allowing yourself, in small and manageable ways, to experience situations where you loosen control slightly and discover that you remain safe. Letting someone else handle something and finding that it turns out all right. Tolerating a small uncertainty and discovering that the feared catastrophe does not arrive. Each of these experiences is a piece of new evidence for a nervous system that was trained on old evidence. Over time, repeated experiences of safety can gradually recalibrate the threat detection system, teaching it at the level where it actually operates that the world is safer than it learned to believe. The fourth movement is to build the trust and connection that the original environment failed to provide. Horney understood that the need for control is, at its root, a response to a lack of safety in relationships, to a world of others who could not be relied upon. The deepest healing, then, comes not only from managing the strategy, but from having new relational experiences that contradict the original ones. Relationships that are reliable, safe, and trustworthy, in which you can gradually learn that depending on others does not have to end in disappointment or danger. This is slow work, and it requires the courage to risk trust that your history taught you to withhold. But it addresses the wound at its source. The control strategy developed because others could not be relied upon for safety. It loosens, finally, when you discover, through real experience with people who prove trustworthy, that safety no longer has to be manufactured entirely by you, because you are no longer entirely alone in providing it. You are not a control freak. You are someone who learned, early and for real reasons, that safety could not be taken for granted, and who developed out of that hard knowledge an intelligent and effective strategy for protecting yourself. The vigilance you carry, the need to manage and anticipate and control, was not a defect that appeared in you for no reason. It was a solution, the best solution available to a child who had to find some way to feel safe in a world that would not reliably provide it. Horney understood this with deep compassion, and modern neuroscience confirms it. Your need for control is the signature of a survivor, not the symptom of a flaw. This reframing matters more than it might seem, because the shame we carry about our need for control often makes everything worse, adding self-criticism to anxiety, turning us against the very strategies that once saved us. To understand that your control made sense, that it protected you, that it was intelligence rather than dysfunction, is to finally stop fighting yourself. And it is only from that place of understanding rather than shame that real change becomes possible. You cannot heal a strategy you're ashamed of. You can only heal one you understand. And the strategy can change, not through force, not through simply demanding that you relax, but through the slow, patient work of giving yourself the safety you never had. Through understanding what your control was for. Through learning to tell the present from the past. Through new experiences that teach your nervous system, at the level where it actually lives, that the danger has passed. Through relationships that prove, over time, that you are no longer alone in keeping yourself safe. The grip that once protected you can loosen, gradually, as you build the genuine safety that makes it unnecessary. You did what you had to do to survive. There is no shame in that. There is only the quiet dignity of a person who found a way through. And now, perhaps, you are safe in ways the child who built this strategy could never have imagined. The work ahead is not to condemn the strategy that saved you, but to thank it, understand it, and slowly show it that it can finally rest, that the danger it was built to guard against has passed, and that you are allowed, at last, to feel safe not because you have controlled everything, but because you have finally learned that you no longer have to.